there, gang. We're just jumping into one right here. Long story. I had another instrument in mind for this week's video, but in the process of diagnosing it, we discovered that it had a broken truss rod. And so the owner is going to take it back to the nefarious fiend who sold it to him as in very good condition to beat him about the head and shoulders with it. Maybe it'll return for a re-rod. Maybe it'll be lost to the sands of time. The other job I'm working on is a headstock that I can't get done in a week, so here we go. I'm sure I can make something entertaining of this, right? So this is a Takamine EF400-S from 1983. You might pronounce it Takamine. You're not part of my friend group. It's a blatant copy of a Martin Dreadnought. It's like a D1228 or something. Interestingly, this is the year they were stopped from using a logo that looked very Martin-like in its typeface. They're naughty. It's a workaday kind of guitar, but it does look the part. And do you notice anything? That's right, the saddle slant betrays it as a left-handed 12th string, which are kind of rare. You don't see them very often, which makes this special. These guitars achieve prices in the range of $500 or $600 usually. But it's, in for a setup and to check the electronics because it has an ancient preamp which is not working. 45 years old at this point. When we hear that, there's sort of a list we run through, hoping, optimistically, mind you, that it's something like just a loose wire or something. Because if we have to go inside that box, that's when it gets very messy and expensive. The very first thing is the battery. It won't work if the battery is dead. And from this era, if you leave these guitars plugged in for a day or two, the battery will be drained. Because when the jack is installed, it's draining the battery. This battery happens to be new. It is full of wonderful electricity. Then I check the jack to make sure it's not so gummed up with oxides or cat hair that it no longer functions. Throw a bunch of cleaner in there. That ain't it. So I check the jack connections. In this design, it would be rare for the wires to be pulled off. But if you have a modern style barrel jack and it's been left loose, those can spin the wires around and around like a record baby to the point of breaking the solder contact. Those look fine, but I will reflow them all with a little bit of fresh solder just to make sure they haven't gone cold or something. At that point, I'm starting to look at internal jacks and contact points. These things have a somewhat weird battery storage system. There's a plastic clip that holds it in place, and then there's a separate kind of contact holder for the wires. I had to make sure that those were in the correct orientation and everything. And the preamp itself is kind of monolithic. Sprayed out the jacks for that one too. Still nothing. And they'll get some cleaner in from the front side as well. It's doubtful that this will repair anything, but you never know. There could be some conductive fluff that has flown in there and is, especially on the gain circuit, shunting everything to ground. This could blow that out of the way. So the question immediately becomes, do we try and repair the old unit or just replace it? Don't fool around at all. I did some research, and there are people who have tried. There are a bunch of tiny capacitors on the board in there that can go bad. They'll drift out of tolerance over time and just make the thing non-functional. And there are people who have tried recapping them, which requires about $25 worth of hardware. But how much time? A lot. Because it's not like you're going to test every cap before you, install it. That involves unsoldering it from the board, testing it, and then either putting it back or just putting a new one in which case you're going to put the new one in anyway. And these things are about the size of an ungorged tick. What happens if we do that and it still doesn't work? Which is a possibility. So, unless you are a vintage Takamine collector looking for one of these left-handed 12 strings, originality they don't care. Just 9 times out of 10, just make it work. So I checked around in all the usual places, and I found a preamp that comes closest to the original dimensions. That is the story with trying to replace these old preamps. Many of the ones on the market now have very curved base plates. They're designed to go on sort of the tightest part of the curve on the upper bout, so they won't sit flat on a side like that. And this one hopefully will come pretty close. Nothing ever fits. The other thing is, Takamine has always been very crafty about making their preamp units like non-intuitive to remove. The ones from the 90s and early 2000s that I'm more familiar with have a little hidden catch that's accessible. On one side there'll be a little round hole that you can push something through. And on the other side there is no hole, which is like, what? But you can reach it if you go through the fader slot with some thin rigid tool. I use like a coffee stir stick or something, and press in firmly. There is a little catch in there. And you're like, yay! But at the same time you're like, oh no, because you have released the unit inside, which is rather large and heavy, and it will go blonking around. And if the guitar is upright on the bench, it'll fall a full 19 inches to the tail block, possibly making a big scary sound. But no, in this case there is no pressure release catch. I had to do some more research, dug around, and eventually I came up with a thread in a forum where someone mentioned that there are screws holding this in place that are accessible only if you remove the metallic indicator strips. I don't know this for a fact, of course, but people never put untested information in 14-year-old internet threads. So, hey, we'll give it a shot. I'm going to warm these up a bit. This is a hair dryer, not a heat gun. It's an important distinction. This is not set on full blast, it's just warming. I can touch it. It's not going to burn my fingers. So, a little bit of heat, and the outside one comes off, and there's a screw. So I do the other side where you expect the other one to be, and there is no screw. They were real crafty about it, like I said, and hid it under the second. So I'll pick these up and stick them on a piece of paper in case anyone wants to save them. I'll stuff a towel in there, just to make sure it has a nice soft landing zone. Looks like one of those Japanese, not quite a Phillips and not a Pasa drive, but something of its own that can be accessed by both of those drivers. Like that. I mean, plastic housing, but they look pretty darn robust, eh? Like a VCR made in 1984. You know, I've encountered people who have tried to find replacements for their old preamps on eBay and other sites. But frequently the same thing that is wrong with your guitar will be wrong with the replacement, you know. They all tend to fail at the same time. It's like people who buy new old stock stereos and things, not counting on the fact that stuff like rubber drive belts or drivetrain wheels or various lubricants will either get extremely hard and crusty or turn to soup sometimes. I'll tell you, there's 10 times more screws holding this together than you'll find in any individual preamp sold today. Okay, so you can see there are a bunch of little guys in here. I mean, I'm just going to do a quick cursory check to see that there isn't any obvious broken solder. You wouldn't expect there to be anything that appears cold or something. That all looks pretty darn good. I don't see any obvious places where things have gotten hot. They shouldn't with a 9-volt. But maybe it was hit by lightning. Yeah, I don't see anything that would point to a mechanical problem. It could just be drifting values. And like I said, there's no way. Not first time. No, I'm going to be cutting wood. This one has got a battery that's accessible from outside the guitar, which is kind of nice. You have to press the little clicky device and rotate, and there's access. This one has a connector plug which it's going to bring us pretty darn close to. Look, I'm going to have to probably cut away a little bit of the lining inside as well to make that function. But it's okay. I'm pretty sure it'll go in. I'll check the overall width necessary, which is let's call it 48 millimeters. That gives us a millimeter to spare on either side for some wiggle room. So we're going to need to remove about 9 millimeters worth of material. I've got plenty of room here on this side towards the neck block. There's about 15 millimeters or so. I'd rather use that side than this because it starts to get more curvy over here, and I'd like to keep it as flat as possible. So let's do 5 millimeters or so on this side. Try and keep it as square to the front as possible. This is also going to end up, I think, more towards the soundboard area than being centered, just due to the design and the fact that I've got to accommodate this wire clip here. There's a bit of a ledge that can hook around, which is nice, but it doesn't. Well, I mean, if I keep it as it is, I might be able to make that work. So I'm just going to widen it first and see if I have to take any off the front or back, rather than trying to do the fancy mathematics that go along with it. I'll drill some positioning holes to denote the corners. I hadn't noticed that there are some protuberances on the outside part of the bezel that actually need to go under the surface of the body as well, so I have to widen this again. The access hatch clip also needs to have a cutout for itself, so I'll mark that, and I'll excise the unnecessary side material. That seems to fit okay, so I can drill pilot holes for the screws. We'll get rid of any torn fibers along the inside with a little sanding block. A little rub down with some guitar cleaner before we do the final installation. I'll get the base plate screwed in place. It looks like it grew there. I have to splice the wire from the Takamine pickup into the one from the preamp. This is not difficult. Just have to tin the various leads. Well, there is only 2 leads, one from either side. And then solder or solder those together. Put on some heat shrink tubing. The 25-watt iron is cool enough to do the job but not burn the insulation. The original jack mounting housing had 3 screws which will not be covered by the new one, so I will plug those with some dowel and some glue. When the glue's had a chance to dry, I'll darken the light spots in the midst of all that rosewood, and I'll install the jack. You can see I've got this set up with my heat press on it. I'm not going to be using any heat, but I am going to try and use it to assist the truss rod. This thing came in with action of 8/64ths on both bass and treble, which on a 12-string is absolute murder. You can't. 8/64ths is too much. The thing is, the truss rod was completely loose. There was no tension on it at all. I don't know how long it had been like that, but that is a worrisome condition to find a 12-string in. And so I cranked this thing as far as it will go, to the point where I'm nervous, and that brought us down to about 16 thousandths worth of neck relief. And the action is now sitting about 6/64ths, which is okay. It's better. It's not really as good as I want. So I'm going to see if I can, I'm going to slightly loosen the rod off to begin with, and I'm going to crank this up so that the neck is perfectly straight, and then use the truss rod to try and hold it there. So I'm going to back off. A little ways. And I've got this set around the 7th fret. And we'll apply pressure. And I'm going to sight the neck and the underside of the beam here. Okay. Now I will retighten the rod as far as it'll go, and hopefully that'll gain us a few extra thousandths. Okay, that got us an extra 1/8 of a turn or so. polishing, polishing, polishing. It makes amplified sound. And I managed to get the strings on in the right direction. First try. Okay, backwards and upside down 12 string. The action is now 5 1/2/64 bass and treble. Very much improved. And you can plug it in and it will make sounds. Very nice.